Story 1. The Weight That Follows. Gregory Mason was a 46-year-old physical therapist from Richmond who understood biomechanics, understood how the human body carried weight, understood the physics of load distribution and muscular compensation. He had treated countless patients with back injuries from improper lifting, had taught proper body mechanics for 20 years. In October 2018, while section hiking through West Virginia, Gregory picked up a small stone as a souvenir, a perfectly ordinary rock that weighed perhaps 3 ounces. What Gregory discovered was that some weights increase independent of mass, and that carrying something that grows heavier without growing larger can compress you in ways that go beyond physical injury. Gregory was on a 5-day solo hike, carrying a carefully balanced pack that distributed weight according to optimal biomechanical principles. Everything was positioned correctly, weight centered over his hips, no strain on his shoulders or back. His professional knowledge made him meticulous about proper load carrying. On the second day, while resting at a scenic overlook, Gregory found a stone that caught his attention. It was smooth, dark gray with interesting banding patterns. He picked it up, admiring its appearance, and decided to keep it as a memento. The stone was small enough to fit in his pocket, weighing almost nothing. Gregory continued hiking with the stone in his jacket pocket. After about an hour, he noticed his pocket felt heavier than it should. He reached in and pulled out the stone, weighing it in his hand. It felt like it had gained weight, not dramatically, but noticeable. Perhaps 6 ounces now instead of 3. Gregory's rational mind dismissed this as perception error. Small objects felt heavier when you paid attention to them. He returned the stone to his pocket and continued hiking. By evening, the stone felt significantly heavier. Gregory's jacket was pulling down on one side, the weight in his pocket creating noticeable imbalance. He took out the stone and weighed it using his portable scale. 12 ounces. 4 times heavier than when he had picked it up, despite being the same physical size. This was impossible. Objects didn't spontaneously gain mass. Gregory examined the stone carefully, looking for some explanation. Perhaps it was absorbing water. But the stone's surface was dry, and even water absorption couldn't account for a 4-fold increase in weight. He decided to discard the stone, recognizing something was wrong. But when Gregory tried to throw it away, his hand refused to release it. His fingers gripped the stone automatically, his muscles contracting against his conscious intention. He couldn't make himself let go. After 10 minutes of struggle, Gregory managed to force his hand open through sheer willpower. The stone fell to the ground. Relief flooded through him. Whatever strange compulsion the stone created, he had overcome it. Gregory hiked away quickly, putting distance between himself and the discarded stone. But after about 20 minutes, he felt weight in his pocket again. He reached in and found the stone. It had returned, had somehow traveled from where he had dropped it back into his pocket without his awareness. The stone now weighed over a pound. Gregory's pocket sagged heavily, the weight pulling his jacket down uncomfortably. He tried to discard it again, and again found his hand wouldn't release it voluntarily. When he finally forced it open, the stone fell out, and then was back in his pocket within minutes. The pattern repeated throughout the evening. Gregory would struggle to release the stone, would briefly be free of it, then would find it had returned and gained more weight. By nightfall, the stone weighed approximately 3 pounds, far too heavy for something that still looked like a small rock that should weigh a few ounces. Gregory set up his tent and tried to leave the stone outside, separated from himself by the tent walls. But in the morning, it was in his sleeping bag with him, pressed against his side, now weighing close to 5 pounds. The weight increased throughout day 3. The stone remained the same size, small enough to fit in Gregory's hand, but its mass kept growing. By afternoon, it weighed 10 pounds. By evening, 20 pounds. Gregory's entire body was compensating for the weight, his gait changing, his posture adjusting, his muscles working constantly to support the impossible mass. His professional knowledge told him this was causing injury. His spine was compressing, his hip joint was bearing unnatural load, his back muscles were being strained beyond their capacity. But he couldn't stop carrying the stone. It wouldn't stay discarded, wouldn't remain separated from him. By day 4, the stone weighed 40 pounds. Gregory was hiking hunched over, his body crushed by the weight of something that still looked like it should weigh 3 ounces. Other hikers he encountered looked at him with concern, seeing his labored movement and bent posture. When they asked if he needed help, Gregory tried to show them the stone, tried to explain that he was carrying something impossibly heavy. But when other hikers looked at the stone, they saw only a small rock. "That little thing?" they would say. "That weighs nothing. Why are you acting like it's heavy?" The stone's weight was somehow specific to Gregory, perceptible only to him. To everyone else, it appeared as the small, light rock it physically resembled. Only Gregory experienced its true mass, its crushing weight that kept increasing. By day 5, Gregory could barely walk. The stone weighed over 60 pounds, concentrated in a form the size of his fist. The physical laws this violated were numerous, but Gregory's body didn't care about physics. It responded to the actual weight, regardless of how impossible that weight was. His spine was compressed, his discs bulging under the load. His hip joints were grinding, cartilage wearing away from the constant excessive pressure. His feet were being damaged, the bones compressing under weight they weren't designed to carry. Gregory was being crushed, his body collapsing under a mass that existed without corresponding matter. He tried to reach a road to get medical help, but movement was nearly impossible. Each step was agony, his body screaming in protest at the weight it was forced to support. The stone was in his hand now. He couldn't keep it in a pocket anymore because the fabric would tear from the weight. He carried it clutched against his chest, his arms straining, his entire body bent under the load. Other hikers who encountered Gregory in this state called for emergency services. Rangers arrived and found him collapsed on the trail, curled around something he insisted weighed enormous amounts but appeared to be a small stone. They tried to take it from him, thinking it was causing psychological distress, but Gregory's grip was unbreakable. The stone wouldn't allow itself to be separated. They evacuated Gregory by stretcher, his body compressed and damaged, still clutching the stone that weighed, according to his screaming insistence, over 100 pounds. At the hospital, doctors found severe spinal compression, joint damage, muscular injury, all consistent with carrying massive weight for extended periods. But they could find no heavy object. The stone Gregory clutched weighed 3 ounces on their scales. Medical imaging showed Gregory's body was compressed as if under enormous load. His vertebrae were crushed closer together, his organs were displaced by pressure from above, his skeletal structure showed stress patterns from supporting weight far exceeding his body mass. But the only object he carried was a small stone that weighed nothing significant. Psychiatrists were consulted, thinking Gregory was experiencing a somatic delusion. But the physical damage was real, objective, measurable. His body had been carrying massive weight, even if no such weight could be detected. Gregory remained hospitalized for weeks, his body slowly recovering from the compression. But the stone stayed with him in his hand, never separated. And it continued gaining weight. Hospital staff would see him struggling, his hand forced down by the weight of something that looked like it should weigh nothing. The weight finally stopped increasing at approximately 200 pounds. Gregory's hand holding the stone was forced down to the bed, unable to lift the mass. His fingers remained locked around it, his grip maintained by some compulsion stronger than his conscious will. Doctors tried everything to separate Gregory from the stone, surgery to open his hand, sedation to relax his muscles, even considering amputation. But every attempt failed. The stone was bonded to him now, held by force that went beyond muscular contraction. Gregory lives now in a specialized care facility, his body permanently damaged by the weight he carried and continues to carry. His hand rests on a reinforced platform that supports the 200-pound mass that looks like a 3-ounce stone. He cannot move, cannot lift the weight, cannot release the stone. He warns other hikers through written accounts. Never pick up souvenirs from the trail. Never take stones or objects as mementos. Never assume that small things are harmless. Some objects carry weight that has nothing to do with mass, weight that increases independent of size, weight that will crush you while appearing to others as insignificant. Gregory's medical team has documented his case extensively, unable to explain how his body shows all the signs of carrying enormous weight while holding an object that weighs almost nothing. The compression is real. The damage is real. The ongoing strain is real. Only the source remains invisible to everyone except Gregory, who feels every pound of the impossible weight, who carries the crushing mass of something that looks like it should weigh 3 ounces but has become an anchor that pins him to the earth, compressing his body, destroying his mobility, all because he picked up a small stone as a souvenir and learned too late that some weights follow you. Some masses increase independent of matter, and some objects become heavier with every moment you carry them, growing in weight without growing in size until they crush you completely under mass that no one else can perceive. But everyone can see the effects of in your compressed spine, your damaged joints, your body collapsing under the weight of something that appears to weigh nothing at all. Story 2. The Forgetting Trail. Dr. Sarah Blackwell was a 38-year-old neuroscientist from Baltimore who specialized in memory formation and recall. She understood how the hippocampus encoded experiences, how memory consolidation worked, how the brain stored and retrieved information. In July 2016, while hiking a section of the AT through Maryland, Sarah discovered that some trails don't just exist in space, they exist in memory, and that walking a path designed to be forgotten means erasing yourself step by step, losing your own history with each mile until you become someone with no past, no identity, nothing but the eternal present moment of walking forward into forgetting. Sarah was conducting informal research during her hike, keeping detailed notes about how wilderness experience affected memory encoding. She was interested in whether the simplified environment and reduced cognitive demands of hiking would enhance or impair memory formation. The first 3 days of her hike were normal. Sarah's memory functioned typically. She could recall each day's events, remember the hikers she encountered, maintain continuity of experience. Her notes documented normal memory processes. On the 4th day, Sarah hiked through a section of trail that felt different somehow. The forest was denser, the path less distinct, the blazes harder to see. She felt like she was moving through space that resisted being remembered, that actively discouraged memory formation. That evening, when Sarah tried to document her day, she realized she couldn't remember most of it. She knew intellectually that she must have hiked. Her GPS showed mileage, her body showed fatigue. But the specific events, the visual details, the experiences of the day were absent. She had lived through the day but formed no memories of it. Sarah's neuroscience training provided frameworks for understanding memory loss, encoding failure, consolidation problems, retrieval deficits. She ran through differential diagnoses, head injury, medication effects, thiamine deficiency, transient global amnesia, but she had none of the associated symptoms. The memory loss was selective and specific to that day's hiking. The next day, Sarah paid careful attention, trying to consciously encode memories as she hiked. She noted specific trees, unusual rocks, the exact sequence of trail features. She repeated details to herself using memory techniques she had taught to patients. But even as she tried to remember, the memories slipped away. She would note a distinctive tree, look away, and immediately forget having seen it. The trail was preventing memory formation actively, in real time. By afternoon, Sarah realized she couldn't remember the morning's hike despite her conscious efforts. She couldn't remember breakfast, couldn't remember breaking camp, couldn't remember the first 6 miles. The trail was erasing itself from her memory as she walked it, creating a continuous present with no accessible past. More disturbing, Sarah began losing older memories as well. She tried to recall her childhood home and found the image unclear. She tried to remember her graduate school experience and found only fragments. The forgetting wasn't limited to current experience. It was spreading backward through her entire memory, eroding her past progressively. Sarah pulled out her phone to call for help, but when she looked at her contact list, she didn't recognize the names. Her mother, her sister, her colleagues. The names were there, but she couldn't remember who these people were or why they were in her phone. The relational memories that gave names meaning were being erased. She tried to read her own research notes, the journal she had been keeping. The handwriting was hers, but the content was alien. She had no memory of writing these entries, no recollection of the experiences they documented. She was becoming disconnected from her own recent past, unable to maintain continuity with the person she had been even days ago. Sarah understood the neurological catastrophe occurring. Memory was the foundation of identity. Without continuous memory, there was no persistent self, no Sarah that existed across time. She was becoming a series of disconnected moments, each present instant unable to access the past or anticipate the future. She tried to stop hiking, to exit the trail immediately. But when Sarah tried to remember which direction led out, where the nearest road was, how she had arrived at this location, she found nothing. The navigational memories were gone. She didn't know where she had come from or how to leave. The trail had become a trap. By erasing the memory of how she had entered it, the trail ensured she couldn't retrace her steps. By erasing her navigational knowledge, it ensured she couldn't find alternative exits. Sarah was lost not in space but in time, unable to connect her present location to any remembered past location. She encountered other hikers, tried to explain her situation, but mid-conversation she would forget what she was saying, would forget who she was talking to, would forget that she had started a conversation at all. The hikers would walk away confused, having experienced Sarah repeatedly starting and stopping sentences, asking the same questions over and over, unable to maintain conversational continuity. By the 6th day, though Sarah had no memory of previous days and no understanding that this was day 6 rather than day 1, she had lost most of her personal history. She didn't remember her name, her profession, her life before the trail. She knew language, knew basic skills, knew general facts about the world, but episodic memory, the memories of personal experiences that created identity, was almost entirely erased. Sarah existed now in an eternal present. Each moment was disconnected from the previous moment. She would start hiking with no memory of having decided to hike. She would eat without remembering being hungry. She would set up her tent without remembering having carried a tent or knowing why she needed shelter. Other hikers began to notice a woman on the trail who seemed confused, who would ask the same questions repeatedly, who showed no recognition of people she had encountered multiple times. Rangers were contacted, concerned about a hiker who appeared to be experiencing severe memory problems. When rangers found Sarah, they tried to determine her identity, but she couldn't tell them her name. She had identification in her pack, but when shown her own driver's license, she didn't recognize herself in the photo. She had no memory of ever being the person named on the ID. Medical evacuation took Sarah to a hospital where neurologists examined her extensively. Brain scans showed no structural damage, no evidence of stroke or injury or disease. Her brain was physically healthy. But functionally, her memory systems were not forming new memories and had lost access to most old memories. The condition was unprecedented. Sarah had anti-retrograde amnesia, unable to form new memories and having lost most old memories, without any identifiable neurological cause. She existed in a perpetual present, unable to connect one moment to the next, unable to maintain identity across time. Her family tried to help her remember, showing photos, telling stories, recreating experiences, but Sarah couldn't reconnect with her past. The person in the photos was a stranger. The stories were about someone else. The Sarah who had existed before the trail was gone, replaced by a woman with no history, no continuous self, nothing but the immediate present moment. Months passed and Sarah's condition didn't improve. She had to be supervised constantly because she would forget what she was doing mid-action, would start cooking and forget about the stove, would start crossing a street and forget to watch for cars. Without memory to maintain continuity, she couldn't complete complex actions, couldn't maintain goals, couldn't function independently. The neurological community studied her case, finding scattered historical reports of similar cases. Hikers who emerged from certain trail sections with complete amnesia, unable to remember their past or form new memories. In every case, the amnesia began on the trail and didn't improve after leaving it. Some researchers theorized about environmental toxins, about plants or fungi that could impair memory formation. But no biological agent could explain the selective nature of the memory loss, the way it erased personal episodic memory while preserving semantic knowledge and procedural skills. Sarah lives now in a care facility, experiencing each moment as if it's the only moment, unable to remember breakfast by lunchtime, unable to recognize staff she sees daily, unable to maintain identity across the discontinuous moments of her existence. She is forever present, forever new, forever without history. Her research notes were published posthumously by colleagues, not because Sarah died, but because the Sarah who wrote those notes effectively ceased to exist when her memories were erased. The person who exists now, who carries Sarah's body and Sarah's name, is not the same person who began that hike, who chose that trail, who tried to study memory formation and instead experienced complete memory dissolution. The trail section where Sarah lost her memories has been investigated but shows nothing unusual. Other hikers pass through without incident. Perhaps the forgetting trail only activates under certain conditions, or perhaps it selects specific individuals, or perhaps it's always erasing memories, but most people don't notice the small losses, the minor forgettings, the gradual erosion of past that the trail creates in everyone who walks it, taking small pieces of memory from each hiker, collecting forgotten moments like tolls, leaving most people mostly intact, but occasionally taking someone completely, erasing them entirely, leaving behind only a body that walks forward into an eternal present with no past to anchor it, no memories to create, continuity, no self that persists across time, just the immediate moment of existence without context or history or identity, walking endlessly forward because walking backward requires memory of where you came from. And memory is what the trail takes, piece by piece, step by step, until nothing remains but the walking itself. Story 3. The Elevation Sickness. Marcus Wong was a 41-year-old pulmonologist from Denver who had spent years studying altitude-related illnesses. He understood how reduced oxygen affected the human body, understood acclimatization, understood acute mountain sickness, high-altitude pulmonary edema, high-altitude cerebral edema. In September 2020, while hiking the AT through New Hampshire's White Mountains, Marcus experienced elevation sickness at altitudes that should have been completely safe. discovering that some mountains measure height in dimensions other than feet above sea level, and that altitude can be psychological, spiritual, or existential rather than physical, and that these other forms of elevation are far more dangerous than mere vertical distance. Marcus was in excellent physical condition and well acclimatized to altitude from living in Denver. The White Mountains' highest peaks were only around 5,500 feet, elevations that shouldn't cause any altitude-related problems for someone adapted to living at a mile high. The first 2 days of hiking were normal. Marcus felt strong, experienced no breathing difficulties, maintained excellent pace. The moderate elevations of the White Mountains felt trivial compared to the Colorado peaks he regularly climbed. On the third day, while ascending Mount Washington, Marcus began experiencing symptoms: headache, nausea, difficulty breathing, classic signs of altitude sickness. But his pulse oximeter showed normal oxygen saturation. His lungs were getting adequate oxygen. There was no physiological reason for altitude symptoms at this elevation. Marcus tried to dismiss it as dehydration or exertion, but the symptoms intensified as he climbed. By the time he reached the summit at 6,300 feet, he was severely affected: splitting headache, profound nausea, dizziness, ataxia. He had all the signs of severe acute mountain sickness at an elevation where this should be impossible. His medical training told him to descend immediately to get to lower altitude. But as Marcus started down from the summit, his symptoms didn't improve. In fact, they worsened. By the time he had descended 1,000 feet, he was experiencing symptoms consistent with high-altitude cerebral edema: confusion, altered consciousness, severe ataxia. This occurred at 5,600 feet, an elevation where haste was medically impossible. Marcus realized something was wrong beyond normal physiology. The altitude affecting him wasn't being measured in feet above sea level. He was experiencing elevation in some other dimension, some other form of height, that his altimeter couldn't detect but his body was responding to. He tried to descend further, but the symptoms became life-threatening. Marcus collapsed on the trail, unable to walk, barely conscious, experiencing the severe effects of extreme altitude while at an elevation where most people wouldn't even notice the air was thin. Other hikers found him and called for emergency services. The rescue team was confused. Marcus had all the signs of severe altitude illness, but they were at an elevation where this shouldn't occur. They evacuated him quickly, getting him to a hospital where supplemental oxygen and medications could treat the symptoms. But the treatments didn't work. Marcus's condition continued to deteriorate despite being at sea level, despite receiving high-flow oxygen, despite all the standard interventions for altitude illness. He was experiencing elevation effects while lying in a hospital bed at 0 feet above sea level. Doctors were baffled. Marcus's symptoms were objectively real. Brain imaging showed cerebral edema. Lung imaging showed pulmonary edema. Blood tests showed the metabolic changes associated with altitude exposure. But he was at sea level, breathing supplemental oxygen in an environment where altitude illness was impossible. Marcus, in his brief moments of clarity, tried to explain. "It's not physical elevation," he said. "I went too high in some other way. I reached a summit that wasn't measured in feet. Now I'm at an altitude I can't descend from because it's not a physical height." Medical staff attributed this to altitude-induced confusion, to cerebral edema affecting his thinking. But Marcus's understanding was clear even as his body failed. He had experienced elevation in a dimension orthogonal to physical space, had climbed too high in some existential or spiritual axis, and now suffered the consequences of that height despite being physically at sea level. The symptoms slowly resolved over weeks, but Marcus was never the same. He retained a permanent sensitivity to elevation, not just physical altitude, but something else. In certain buildings, he would experience altitude symptoms despite being on the ground floor. In certain rooms, he would develop headaches and breathing difficulties as if he were at high elevation. Marcus learned to recognize the feeling, the sensation of being too high even when physically low. He couldn't explain it in medical terms, couldn't measure it with instruments, but he could feel it viscerally. Some places, some spaces, some experiences had elevation independent of their physical height, and Marcus had become sensitive to this after his experience on Mount Washington. He stopped practicing medicine, unable to trust his physical responses anymore. How could he treat patients when his own body responded to elevations that didn't physically exist? He moved to Florida, choosing the lowest, flattest state he could find, but even there he occasionally experienced altitude symptoms, feeling himself to be at dangerous height while walking on ground that was barely above sea level. Marcus researched altitude illness cases, finding scattered reports of people experiencing elevation sickness at impossible altitudes. In every case, the victims had been on mountains that were considered sacred, spiritually significant, or otherwise special beyond their physical height. They had climbed peaks that measured high in dimensions other than vertical distance, and their bodies had responded to that metaphysical elevation as if it were physical altitude. He tried to warn other hikers about the phenomenon, about mountains that are higher than their elevation suggests, about peaks that measure height in spiritual or existential dimensions, about the danger of ascending too far in ways that altimeters can't detect. But his warnings were dismissed as the confused testimony of someone whose brain had been damaged by altitude illness. Marcus knows differently. He experienced height that transcended physical measurement, reached a summit that existed in more dimensions than the three spatial ones, and suffered consequences that his medical training couldn't explain or treat. He carries that experience with him permanently, a sensitivity to elevations that others can't perceive, a vulnerability to height that has nothing to do with feet above sea level. Sometimes, late at night, Marcus feels himself rising, not physically moving upward, but ascending in that other dimension, that orthogonal axis of elevation. He feels the altitude increasing, feels the symptoms beginning: headache, nausea, breathing difficulty, even though he's lying in bed in Florida at approximately 10 feet above sea level. The height he reached on Mount Washington hasn't released him, continues to pull him upward in dimensions that compasses and altimeters can't measure, elevating him gradually toward some summit that exists beyond physical space, toward an altitude that will eventually be fatal, not because of oxygen deprivation, but because of something else. Some form of existential or spiritual height that human bodies aren't designed to survive, that kills not through physiological mechanisms, but through metaphysical ones, through being too high in dimensions where height means something other than vertical distance, where elevation is measured not in feet, but in some other unit that Marcus never learned the name of, climbing gradually higher despite staying physically at sea level, ascending toward a summit he can't see but can feel approaching. Story 4. The Trail Family. Jennifer Marshall was a 32-year-old family therapist from Chicago who specialized in attachment disorders and family dynamics. She understood bonding, understood how relationships formed, understood the psychology of family systems. In May 2015, while through hiking the AT, Jennifer was welcomed into a trail family, a group of hikers who bonded and traveled together. What Jennifer discovered was that some families form too quickly, bond too intensely, and that the attachment created on the trail can be pathological, parasitic, refusing to release its members even after the hike ends, even after they want to leave, even after the family dynamic becomes toxic and consuming. Trail families were a normal part of AT culture. Hikers naturally formed groups, traveling together, supporting each other, creating temporary family bonds that made the long journey more manageable. Jennifer looked forward to this social aspect, to the connections she would form with fellow thru-hikers. In Georgia, during her first week on the trail, Jennifer met 4 other hikers who were hiking at similar pace. They naturally began leapfrogging, staying at the same shelters, sharing meals. By the second week, they had consciously decided to hike together as a trail family, adopting the group name, the Summit Seekers. The bonding was rapid and intense. Within days, Jennifer felt closer to her trail family than to friends she had known for years. The shared experience, the mutual support, the constant proximity created bonds that felt profound and genuine. Jennifer felt lucky to have found such a compatible group so early in her thru hike, but by the 3rd week, Jennifer noticed something strange. She couldn't remember the names of her family members back home. Her mother, her siblings. She knew intellectually that she had family in Chicago, but their names and faces were becoming unclear. The trail family was taking up increasing space in her thoughts, crowding out her biological family. Jennifer tried to call her mother, but when her mom answered, Jennifer struggled to feel recognition or connection. The woman on the phone was familiar but distant, less real than her trail family members who she had known for only weeks. Jennifer's attachment to her biological family was being replaced by attachment to the trail family, the new bonds overriding the old ones. By week 4, Jennifer tried to leave the trail family. The intensity was becoming uncomfortable, the bonding too rapid, the expectations too demanding. She wanted to hike alone for a while to process her experience independently. But when she tried to separate, Jennifer experienced physical symptoms: anxiety, panic, actual pain at the prospect of being apart from the group. The attachment had become pathological. The other trail family members discouraged her leaving. "Families stay together," they said. "We need you. You need us. This is where you belong now." Their words felt compelling, overriding Jennifer's desire for independence. She stayed with the group, unable to separate despite wanting to. The trail family dynamic became increasingly controlling. They made decisions collectively, but Jennifer's preferences were consistently overruled. They monitored each other's locations constantly, becoming anxious if anyone separated even briefly. They shared everything: food, gear, personal information, eliminating boundaries between members. Jennifer recognized the pattern from her clinical work. This was enmeshment, the unhealthy fusion of identities that occurred in dysfunctional family systems. But recognizing it didn't help her escape it. The trail family had formed bonds that were too strong, attachments that were pathological. By week 8, Jennifer had lost most of her individual identity. She thought of herself primarily as a member of the Summit Seekers, her personal goals subsumed into the group's goals, her individual preferences irrelevant compared to the family's needs. She was being absorbed into the collective, losing herself in the family system. She tried to reach out to her therapist colleagues to get professional help, but the trail family monitored her communications, becoming upset when she tried to contact people outside the group. "We're your family now," they insisted. "Outside, people don't understand. They'll try to separate us. We can't let that happen." Jennifer attempted to leave multiple times, but each attempt triggered such severe anxiety and physical distress that she couldn't follow through. The attachment was now neurological, creating withdrawal symptoms when she tried to separate from the group. She was addicted to the trail family, dependent on their proximity in ways that transcended normal social bonding. The family completed the thru hike together, reaching Katahdin in late September. Jennifer hoped that finishing the trail would naturally dissolve the group, allowing members to return to their normal lives. But the trail family insisted on staying together, on transitioning from trail family to regular family, on maintaining the bonds permanently. They moved to the same city, found an apartment they could share, got jobs that allowed them to continue spending most of their time together. The trail had ended, but the trail family persisted, refusing to release its members back into independent existence. Jennifer tried to move back to Chicago to resume her normal life. But separation from the trail family created such severe distress, panic attacks, depression, physical illness, that she couldn't stay away. She returned to the communal apartment within days, unable to function independently anymore. The trail family began replacing her other relationships. They discouraged contact with her biological family, claiming these connections were unhealthy attachments to the past. They monitored her friendships, becoming upset if she spent time with people outside the group. They systematically isolated her, creating complete dependence on the family system. Jennifer recognized she was trapped in a cult-like dynamic, but her professional knowledge didn't help her escape. The bonding had occurred at a level deeper than conscious thought, creating dependencies that psychological insight couldn't break. 3 years later, Jennifer still lives with the trail family. They've added new members, other hikers who got too close, who bonded too intensely, who became unable to leave. The family grows slowly, collecting people who made the mistake of forming powerful attachments on the trail, who believed the bonds were healthy and temporary, who discovered too late that some families don't release you, don't allow independence, don't permit individual identity separate from the collective. Jennifer has stopped practicing therapy. She can't treat family dysfunction while trapped in a profoundly dysfunctional family herself. She exists now primarily as a member of the Summit Seekers, her individual identity almost entirely subsumed into the group, her personal goals irrelevant, her autonomy sacrificed to the family system that formed too quickly, bonded too intensely, and refuses to let her go. Other thru-hikers occasionally report similar experiences, trail families that became too close, that created bonds impossible to break, that continued long after the hike ended. Most manage to escape eventually, though it takes years and often requires professional intervention. But some, like Jennifer, remain trapped, unable to separate, living in communal arrangements that perpetuate the trail family dynamic indefinitely. The Summit Seekers still recruit new members, still hike sections of the AT together annually, still form rapid, intense bonds with vulnerable hikers who crave connection and family. They see themselves as providing support and belonging, but they're actually creating dependencies, forming attachments that are parasitic rather than healthy, building a family system that consumes its members' individual identities. Jennifer knows this, understands the dynamics from her professional training, recognizes the pathology clearly, but knowledge doesn't create freedom. She remains bound to the trail family, unable to leave, unable to reclaim independence, unable to separate her identity from the collective, living proof that attachment can become bondage, that family can become prison, and that bonds form too quickly and too intensely on the trail can persist forever, refusing to release you even when you desperately want to leave, even when you recognize the dysfunction, even when you understand that healthy families let you go and only unhealthy ones keep you trapped, dependent, consumed by the collective identity that allows no individual existence, no autonomy, no life beyond the family that formed on the trail and refuses to dissolve, maintaining its grip on every member, forever bound together in attachment that has become pathological, permanent, and inescapable. Story 5. The Honest Hiker. Walter Price was a 54-year-old judge from Philadelphia who had spent his career evaluating truth, determining credibility, separating fact from fiction in testimony. He prided himself on his honesty, on his inability to lie, on his commitment to absolute truthfulness in all circumstances. In June 2019, while section hiking through Pennsylvania, Walter discovered that the wilderness demands dishonesty, that survival sometimes requires lies, and that telling only the truth in an environment that asks dangerous questions can strip you of every protective deception until you're exposed completely. Your inner reality made external and visible to everything that watches from the forest. Walter's commitment to honesty was extreme, bordering on pathological. He had built his entire identity around truthfulness, never lying even in situations where small social lies would be appropriate. This radical honesty had cost him relationships, had made social situations difficult, but Walter believed it was the only ethical way to live. He approached his hike with the same commitment to truth. When other hikers asked how he was doing, Walter would give detailed, honest assessments rather than polite platitudes. When asked if he liked their gear or their hiking style, Walter would offer frank, sometimes harsh critiques. His honesty made him unpopular with other hikers, but Walter felt this was their problem, not his. On the fourth day, while hiking alone through a dense forest section, Walter heard a voice from off the trail. "Are you lost?" the voice asked. Walter stopped and considered. He wasn't lost. He knew exactly where he was on the trail. "No," he answered truthfully. "Are you alone?" the voice asked. "Yes," Walter responded, seeing no reason to lie. "Are you afraid?" the voice asked. Walter examined his emotional state honestly. He was slightly uneasy about the disembodied voice, but not significantly afraid. "Slightly uneasy, but not significantly afraid," he answered with characteristic precision. The questions continued, each one requiring honest self-assessment. Do you trust your judgment? Are you physically weak? Do you feel vulnerable? Walter answered each honestly, describing his mental and physical state with unflinching accuracy. As the questioning continued, Walter began to feel strange. Each honest answer seemed to make the stated condition more true. When he admitted to being slightly uneasy, his unease increased. When he acknowledged physical tiredness, his fatigue deepened. The act of verbally acknowledging his state was amplifying that state, making it more real. The voice asked increasingly personal questions. Do you doubt yourself? Are you lonely? Do you fear death? Walter's commitment to honesty required truthful answers, even to these invasive questions. And with each answer, the acknowledged feeling intensified, becoming more dominant in his consciousness. Do you wish you had lied? The voice asked. Walter considered this carefully. He did wish he hadn't answered so many questions, honestly did wish he had protected himself through deception. Yes, he admitted, and felt something shift. His capacity for dishonesty, his ability to lie, to misdirect, to protect himself through false statements, was being taken. By admitting he wished he could lie, he had somehow given away the ability to lie. The voice continued its interrogation, asking about Walter's fears, insecurities, weaknesses, doubts. His commitment to honesty required he answer truthfully, and each truth stripped away another layer of protective deception, another social mask, another defense mechanism that humans normally maintain through small dishonesties. Walter tried to stop answering, to remain silent, but the compulsion to honesty was too strong. When asked a direct question, he had to answer truthfully. His pathological honesty, usually a choice he made, had become an involuntary compulsion. He couldn't refuse to answer, couldn't lie, couldn't even remain strategically silent. By evening, Walter had been questioned for hours. He had revealed every fear, every weakness, every doubt, every shameful thought, every hidden aspect of his psychology. His inner reality had been completely externalized through forced honest confession. Then the physical questions began. Are your bones strong? The voice asked. Walter assessed honestly. He was 54, had some age-related bone density loss, but nothing severe. Moderately strong, with some age-related degradation, he answered. Immediately, Walter felt his bones weakening, becoming brittle, the acknowledged degradation accelerating. by admitting to weakness, he had made the weakness more severe. "Is your heart healthy?" the voice asked. Walter had mild hypertension, not severe but present. He answered honestly, describing his condition accurately, and felt his heart begin to struggle, the mild condition becoming acute. The voice was using his honesty to reshape him, to make his acknowledged conditions more extreme, to transform stated truths into amplified realities. Every honest answer about his physical or mental state was being used to modify that state, to make him more like the truthful description he provided. "Are you dying?" the voice finally asked. Walter assessed his condition. After hours of questioning that had progressively weakened him physically and psychologically, after every acknowledged vulnerability had been amplified, he was indeed dying. His bones were brittle, his heart was failing, his mind was collapsing under the weight of externalized psychological reality. "Yes," Walter answered honestly, and felt himself accelerate toward death, the acknowledged condition becoming rapidly more true. He was found the next day by other hikers, barely conscious, his body showing signs of extreme aging and physical collapse despite being healthy the previous day. Walter was evacuated to a hospital where doctors struggled to understand his condition. He had aged decades in hours, his bones showing severe osteoporosis, his heart showing advanced disease, his mind showing cognitive decline associated with dementia. More disturbing, Walter couldn't lie anymore. When doctors asked questions, he answered with absolute honesty, unable to soften or deflect or protect himself through normal social dishonesty. When asked if he was afraid, he described his terror in exact detail. When asked if he was in pain, he quantified his suffering precisely. When asked if he wanted to live, he admitted his uncertainty. Every honest answer made the stated condition more severe. Admitting fear increased his fear. Acknowledging pain intensified his pain. Expressing doubt about living made his body shut down more rapidly. Doctors learned to stop asking Walter direct questions, recognizing that his compulsive honesty was somehow amplifying whatever conditions he acknowledged. They communicated with him indirectly, making statements rather than asking questions, avoiding triggering his need to honestly assess and describe his state. Walter lived another 6 months, confined to a hospital bed, his body reflecting every honest assessment he had ever made about himself. He looked like a man in his 90s despite being 54, aged by the cumulative effect of all his acknowledged weaknesses and vulnerabilities made manifest. He tried to warn others about radical honesty, about the danger of answering questions truthfully in the wilderness, about the voices that use truth as a weapon. But his warnings themselves had to be absolutely honest, admitting uncertainty where it existed, acknowledging the possibility he was delusional, qualifying every statement with truthful self-doubt that made the warnings unconvincing. Walter died still unable to lie, still compulsively honest, still having every stated truth about himself amplified into extreme reality. His autopsy showed a body that had aged at impossible speed, that reflected not chronological time but accumulated honest self-assessment. Every acknowledged weakness made severe, every admitted vulnerability made crippling, every truthful description of decline made accelerated and fatal. The wilderness section where Walter encountered the questioning voice has no official markings, no warnings, nothing to indicate it's dangerous. But experienced hikers sometimes whisper warnings to newcomers. If you hear questions from off the trail, don't answer honestly, lie freely. Protect yourself through deception, because absolute truth in the wilderness is suicide. Exposure of your inner reality to forces that will use that truth to reshape you, to make your acknowledged conditions more extreme, to amplify every honest self-assessment until you become a perfect reflection of your own truthful descriptions. aged and weakened and destroyed not by external force but by your own honest answers to questions you should have had the wisdom to lie about, to deflect, to refuse, understanding that some truths are meant to remain internal, that self-knowledge should be protected, that honesty can be weaponized, and that the wilderness sometimes asks questions that demand lies as the only form of self-preservation. Story 6. The Apologizer. Christine Webb was a 35-year-old conflict resolution specialist from Seattle who had built her career on apology and reconciliation. She understood the power of apologizing, understood how accepting responsibility and expressing remorse could resolve disputes and heal relationships. In April 2021, while solo hiking through Virginia, Christine apologized to a tree after accidentally scraping against its bark. What Christine discovered was that apologies create debt, that expressing remorse establishes obligation, and that saying sorry to things that don't require apologies can bind you to them in relationships that demand endless contrition for ever-increasing offenses. Christine's professional training had made apologizing automatic. She apologized frequently and sincerely, seeing it as a tool for maintaining positive relationships and resolving conflicts before they escalated. She apologized to servers who brought her food, to doors she closed too loudly, to inanimate objects she bumped into. Her apologies were reflexive, constant, and genuine. On her second day hiking, Christine scraped her arm against a tree while passing through a narrow trail section. Without thinking, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry," to the tree, the same automatic apology she would offer to a person she had bumped into. The words felt different as she spoke them. Heavier, more binding, as if she had entered into an actual contract with the tree. Christine paused, feeling an odd connection to the tree, a sense that her apology had been received and accepted, creating a relationship where none had existed before. She continued hiking, but throughout the day, Christine felt pulled to return to that tree, to check on it, to ensure her apology had been adequate. The feeling was strong enough that she actually did turn back, hiking a mile out of her way to return to the tree she had scraped against. Standing before it, Christine felt compelled to apologize again, more elaborately. "I'm deeply sorry for scraping you," she said, feeling ridiculous but unable to stop herself. "I should have been more careful. I hope I didn't cause you harm." As she spoke, Christine felt the relationship with the tree deepening, her contrition creating bonds that felt increasingly concrete. The tree had accepted her initial apology and now accepted her expanded apology, and in doing so had established expectations of continued remorse and attention. Over the next few days, Christine found herself apologizing to everything: rocks she stepped on, streams she crossed, plants she brushed past. Each apology felt binding, creating a relationship that demanded ongoing contrition. The forest was filling with entities she owed ongoing remorse to, all of them expecting her continued attention and regret. By day 5, Christine couldn't hike more than a few yards without stopping to apologize to something. Each step required navigation through a minefield of potential offenses. Don't step on that root. Apologize to the rock you just touched. Express remorse for drinking from the stream. Her progress slowed to almost nothing as she spent hours in elaborate apologies to the forest features she had interacted with. The apologies themselves became more demanding. A simple, "I'm sorry," was no longer adequate. The trees, rocks, and plants expected detailed expressions of remorse, acknowledgement of specific harms, commitments to avoid future offenses. Christine found herself having extended one-sided conversations, apologizing extensively for minor interactions. More disturbing, the things she had apologized to began following her, not physically moving but present in her awareness no matter how far she hiked. The tree from day 2 remained in her consciousness, expecting continued remorse. The rock she had apologized to on day 3 demanded ongoing contrition. Christine was accumulating a psychological trail of entities she had established apologetic relationships with, all of them present in her mind, all expecting her continued attention. By day 7, Christine was paralyzed by her apology obligations. She sat beside the trail, unable to move forward because every step would require new apologies, unable to rest because the things she had already apologized to demanded renewed expressions of remorse. She was trapped in a web of contrition, bound to hundreds of forest features through her own reflexive apologizing. Other hikers found her sitting motionless, murmuring apologies to the air around her. They tried to help, to get her moving, but Christine insisted she couldn't leave without properly concluding her apologetic relationships. She owed contrition to so many things, had established so many obligations through her reflexive sorries, that she couldn't ethically depart without fulfilling those obligations. Rangers eventually evacuated her, physically carrying her away from the trail as she protested that she hadn't finished apologizing, hadn't adequately expressed her remorse, hadn't fulfilled her obligations to the trees and rocks and streams she had offended through her presence. At the hospital, Christine continued apologizing constantly, to the staff who helped her, to the medical equipment she used, to the building itself. Every interaction generated new apologies, creating new obligations, expanding the web of contrition that trapped her. Her compulsive apologizing, originally a professional tool, had become a pathological condition that prevented normal functioning. Psychiatrists tried to treat her, recognizing the apologizing as a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder. But cognitive behavioral therapy was ineffective because Christine's apologies felt genuinely necessary, not irrational. She had established real obligations through her sorries, or at least obligations that felt real to her, and dismissing them as irrational compulsion didn't change her visceral sense of debt. The things Christine had apologized to on the trail remained present in her consciousness, demanding ongoing remorse even across hundreds of miles. She could feel them waiting, expecting her continued contrition, angry when she failed to provide adequate apologies. The relationships established through her initial sorries were permanent, inescapable, demanding endless attention. Christine stopped working in conflict resolution, unable to use apology as a tool anymore. Every sorry she offered, even for legitimate offenses in professional contexts, created bonds that felt permanent and demanding. She couldn't use apology strategically when each one established a relationship that required ongoing emotional investment. She lives now in careful silence, trying not to apologize for anything, trying not to create new, obligatory relationships. But the forest entities she established apologetic bonds with continue to demand attention, continue to expect remorse, continue to pull at her consciousness from hundreds of miles away, reminding her that apologies create obligations, that expressing remorse establishes relationships, and that saying sorry to things that don't require apologies can bind you to them forever in webs of contrition that can never be satisfied, never be concluded, never be escaped. Christine has tried to warn others about compulsive apologizing, about the danger of expressing remorse reflexively, about how sorries can create bonds that transcend normal social relationships. But her warnings themselves are punctuated with apologies. Sorry for taking your time, sorry if this seems strange, sorry for bothering you. Each apology creating new micro-obligations that add to the crushing weight of contrition she already carries, expanding the web rather than escaping it, demonstrating through her own continued compulsion that some patterns can't be broken even when you understand them, that some reflexes persist despite awareness of their danger, and that apologies, once they become automatic and indiscriminate, will bind you to the entire world in relationships of endless remorse for the simple act of existing and interacting and touching anything at all. Story 7. The Grateful Hiker. Brian Morrison was a 43-year-old motivational speaker from Austin who specialized in gratitude practices. He taught clients to appreciate everything, to express thanks constantly, to see every experience as a gift. His own gratitude practice was intense. He thanked the universe for his experiences, thanked objects for their utility, thanked circumstances for their lessons. In August 2018, while hiking through North Carolina, Brian expressed gratitude for a beautiful sunrise and discovered that thanking things creates expectation. That gratitude establishes obligation to be grateful for everything that follows, and that the universe responds to thankfulness by providing more to be grateful for, including things no sane person would want to be thankful for. Brian's gratitude practice was comprehensive. He thanked the trail for allowing him to walk, thanked his gear for functioning, thanked the weather for providing experience. His constant thankfulness was genuine, rooted in his belief that gratitude was the foundation of happiness and fulfillment. On his third morning, Brian watched a spectacular sunrise from a mountain overlook. The sky turned brilliant orange and red, the light transforming the landscape into something transcendent. Brian felt overwhelming gratitude and expressed it aloud. "Thank you. Thank you for this beauty. Thank you for this experience. I am so grateful." The words felt acknowledged, as if the universe had heard him and accepted his thanks. Brian felt a warm confirmation, a sense that his gratitude had been received and appreciated. He continued his hike, feeling blessed and fulfilled. But throughout that day, Brian noticed that every positive experience came with a faint expectation of gratitude. When he found a good campsite, he felt compelled to express thanks. When the weather stayed pleasant, he felt obligated to acknowledge and appreciate it. The gratitude was no longer just his choice. It was becoming a requirement, an obligation he owed for each positive experience. By day 5, the pattern had intensified. Every good thing that happened came with a strong expectation of thankfulness. Brian would find his water bottle still had water in it and immediately feel compelled to express elaborate gratitude. He would successfully navigate a difficult trail section and feel obligated to thank the trail, his gear, his body, the universe, every factor that had contributed to his success. The gratitude was taking hours each day. Brian would stop after each minor positive event to express proper thanks, to adequately appreciate what he had received, to fulfill the obligation that came with each gift. Then the negative experiences began. Brian stepped in mud, thoroughly soaking his boots, and immediately felt the expectation of gratitude. "Thank you for this learning experience. Thank you for this challenge. Thank you for this opportunity to practice resilience." The universe expected him to be grateful for everything, not just the objectively positive experiences. Brian tried to refuse, tried to simply be annoyed about his wet boots without framing it as a gift. But the compulsion was too strong. He heard himself thanking the mud for the lesson, thanking his wet boots for teaching him about preparedness, thanking the discomfort for building character. The negative experiences escalated, each one coming with the expectation of gratitude. Brian developed severe blisters. "Thank you for this lesson in pain management." He ran out of food a day early. "Thank you for this opportunity to experience hunger." He got lost and spent hours bushwhacking. "Thank you for this chance to practice navigation." Brian realized what was happening. By establishing a practice of gratitude for positive experiences, he had created an obligation to be grateful for everything. The universe was providing experiences specifically designed to be thankfulness-inducing, including experiences that were objectively harmful, painful, or dangerous, all accompanied by the expectation that Brian would express proper gratitude for them. He tried to stop the gratitude practice, to simply experience events without framing them as gifts. But the compulsion was too deeply ingrained. When something bad happened, Brian's mind automatically reframed it as a blessing. found some angle to be grateful for, expressed thanks even for experiences he desperately didn't want. The experiences became more extreme, testing the limits of what Brian could be grateful for. He fell and badly sprained his ankle. Thank you for this lesson in fragility. He was caught in a severe thunderstorm. Thank you for this humbling experience of nature's power. He ran completely out of water and spent hours desperately thirsty. Thank you for this reminder of water's preciousness. Each negative experience came with the clear expectation of gratitude, and Brian found himself unable to withhold it. His gratitude practice had become a trap, obligating him to be thankful for everything the universe provided, no matter how harmful or unwanted. By day 12, Brian was in serious physical distress, injured, dehydrated, exhausted. But he continued expressing elaborate gratitude for each element of his suffering, thanking the universe for the lessons, thanking his pain for the wisdom, thanking his depleted state for the spiritual growth. Rangers found him near collapse, murmuring thanks for his imminent death. Grateful for the completeness of the experience, thankful for the opportunity to face mortality. They evacuated him, disturbed by his insistence on expressing gratitude for his life-threatening condition. In the hospital, Brian continued the gratitude practice compulsively. Every medical intervention came with elaborate thanks. Every painful procedure was framed as a gift. Every setback in his recovery was appreciated as a learning opportunity. The medical staff found his attitude disturbing rather than inspirational. There was something wrong about his gratitude, something compulsive and hollow in his constant thankfulness for objectively terrible experiences. Psychologists recognized it as a defense mechanism taken to pathological extremes. Brian couldn't allow himself to have negative reactions to negative experiences anymore. His gratitude practice had overridden his normal emotional responses, forcing him to reframe everything as positive, to be thankful for everything, to find gifts in all experiences regardless of their actual impact on his well-being. Brian never returned to motivational speaking. His gratitude practice had revealed itself as toxic, as a way of accepting harm by reframing it as benefit, as a method of being complicit in one's own suffering by being grateful for it. He had been teaching people to thank the universe for everything, not realizing that this created an obligation to accept everything the universe provided, including suffering, harm, and danger, all reframed as gifts that demanded thankfulness. He lives now trying to cultivate appropriate negative reactions, trying to allow himself to be angry, sad, or frustrated without immediately reframing those feelings as gifts. But the gratitude compulsion remains strong, automatically finding something to be thankful for in every experience, preventing him from having authentic negative responses to genuinely negative situations. Sometimes Brian thinks about the trail, about the escalating series of harmful experiences that came after he expressed deep gratitude for the sunrise. He wonders if the universe was responding to his thankfulness by providing more to be grateful for, testing the limits of his gratitude practice, offering worse and worse experiences to see if he would continue being thankful. Or if his own compulsive reframing was simply making him complicit in accepting harm by calling it a gift. Either way, Brian learned that gratitude can be weaponized, that thankfulness can create obligation, that expressing appreciation establishes expectations, and that a practice of being grateful for everything will lead the universe, or your own mind, to provide everything, including suffering and harm and danger, all wrapped in the expectation that you'll be thankful for it, that you'll find the lesson in your pain, that you'll appreciate the growth in your trauma, that you'll thank whatever provides your experiences for every experience it provides. No matter how destructive, no matter how unwanted, no matter how clearly it harms rather than helps, forcing you to reframe harm as gift and suffer while smiling, Grateful for the suffering because gratitude has become not a practice but a prison, not a choice but a compulsion, not a path to happiness but a trap that makes you complicit in your own destruction by requiring you to be thankful for it. Story 8. The Precise Hiker. Dr. Rachel Winters was a 39-year-old mathematician from Princeton who specialized in precision and exactitude. She thought in numbers, measured everything, valued accuracy above all else. In October 2017, while hiking through Vermont, Rachel began calculating her precise position, measuring her exact progress, tracking every variable with mathematical precision. What Rachel discovered was that the trail doesn't tolerate exact measurement, that precision creates fixedness, and that defining your position too accurately can lock you into those exact coordinates, trapping you at a single point while the rest of the world continues to move. Rachel approached hiking as she approached everything, with mathematical rigor. She carried GPS units with accuracy to within 3 feet, tracked her position continuously, logged her coordinates every 100 yards. She knew her exact location at all times, could plot her position on maps with perfect precision. For the first 4 days, this worked well. Rachel's precise tracking gave her confidence, allowed her to maintain perfect awareness of her position and progress. She knew exactly where she was, exactly how far she had traveled, exactly what remained. On the 5th day, Rachel noticed something odd. Her GPS was showing that she had been at the same coordinates for over an hour despite continuous hiking. She checked her backup GPS, same coordinates. She verified manually using landmarks and maps. The GPS was wrong. She had definitely moved several miles, but her GPS insisted she was at the same exact position she had been an hour ago. Rachel recalibrated her equipment, thinking it was a technical malfunction. But the problem persisted. No matter how far she hiked, her GPS showed the same coordinates. It was as if she were moving through space without changing position, traveling without going anywhere. By evening, Rachel realized the problem was more fundamental than GPS error. She had arrived at a shelter that should be 5 miles north of her starting point for the day. But when she checked her GPS, it showed her at the exact same coordinates she had been that morning. She had somehow traveled 5 miles while remaining at the same position. Rachel tried to understand this mathematically. In normal 3-dimensional space, movement meant changing position, meant updating your coordinates. But she was experiencing movement without positional change, as if she were on a treadmill that let her walk without going anywhere. The next day, Rachel paid careful attention to the relationship between her movement and her position. She walked north for an hour, a distance that should change her latitude significantly. But her GPS showed no change in coordinates. She was moving through the landscape, passing trees and rocks and trail markers, but her mathematical position remained fixed. She tried moving in different directions, east, west, even south. No matter which direction she traveled, her GPS coordinates remained unchanged. Rachel had become mathematically fixed, her position defined so precisely that it couldn't update, couldn't change, couldn't move. Rachel realized what had happened. By measuring her position with such extreme precision, by defining her location down to 3-foot accuracy continuously, she had created a kind of mathematical lock. Her position was so precisely defined that it became fixed, became a constant rather than a variable, became immune to change. In quantum mechanics, this was similar to the observer effect. Measuring something too precisely affected the thing being measured. Rachel had measured her position so accurately, so continuously, that she had collapsed her positional wave function into a single fixed state. She was at those exact coordinates, and because she had defined her location so precisely, she couldn't be anywhere else. Rachel tried to stop measuring her position, to stop checking her GPS, hoping that without observation her position would become variable again. but the damage was done. Her coordinates were fixed, locked into the mathematical reality she had created through obsessive precision. Even without checking her GPS, she could feel that her position wasn't changing, that she was moving through space without updating her location. Other hikers confirmed the phenomenon. They could see Rachel moving, could watch her hike for hours, but if they checked their GPS against hers, she was always at the same coordinates. She was traveling through space without changing her mathematical position, moving without going anywhere, trapped at a single set of coordinates while able to observe and interact with the landscape around her. Rachel hiked for 3 more days, moving through the Vermont wilderness, visiting shelters, crossing mountains, covering dozens of miles, but her GPS never changed. She remained mathematically at the exact same position she had been when she became locked, her coordinates fixed by the precision with which she had defined them. Eventually, rangers found her in a state of mathematical paradox. She was physically in Vermont, moving through the landscape, but mathematically she was trapped at a single point, her position unable to update, her coordinates frozen. They tried to help her to understand what had happened, but the phenomenon defied normal explanation. Rachel tried to explain the mathematics, how precise measurement had created fixedness, how defining her position too accurately had locked her into those coordinates. But to most people, this sounded like delusional thinking rather than actual mathematical reality. She returned home, still mathematically trapped at the coordinates where she had become locked. According to her GPS, she was still in Vermont at the exact position where the problem began, despite physically being in Princeton. Her mathematical location and her physical location had become disconnected, separated by hundreds of miles but impossible to reconcile. Rachel stopped working as a mathematician. She couldn't trust precision anymore, couldn't measure things without fear of creating unintended fixedness. She had learned that excessive accuracy creates rigidity, that defining something too precisely removes its ability to change. That measurement itself can trap what's being measured. She lives now in deliberate vagueness, refusing to measure her position, refusing to track her location, refusing to define anything with the precision that once defined her professional identity. But mathematically, she remains trapped at those Vermont coordinates, her position locked by the accuracy with which she once measured it, her mathematical self still standing at that exact point even as her physical self tries to move forward, split between physical reality and mathematical reality, unable to reconcile the two, unable to update her coordinates, unable to change her position because she defined it too precisely, because she measured it too accurately, because she believed that exactitude was always valuable and never realized that some things need to remain vague, some positions need to stay approximate, and some locations should never be measured with perfect precision because doing so removes their ability to change, locks them into mathematical fixedness, creates coordinates that can't be updated, positions that can't move, points in space that become permanent prisons for the parts of yourself that exist in mathematical description, trapped forever at the exact coordinates where you last measured yourself with perfect accuracy, unable to be anywhere else because you defined where you were too precisely. Story 9. The Last Step. Thomas Reed was a 47-year-old motivational coach from Denver who specialized in completion and follow-through. His entire philosophy centered on finishing what you start, taking the final step, achieving closure. In May 2020, while attempting to complete his AT thru hike, Thomas reached the final mile before Katahdin, the last step of a journey he had spent months completing. What Thomas discovered was that some things are not meant to be completed, that final steps can be infinitely postponed, and that trying to finish a journey the trail doesn't want to end can trap you forever in the space between almost done and actually done. Thomas's thru hike had been textbook perfect. He had maintained good health, consistent mileage, positive attitude. After 5 months and over 2,000 miles, he was within 1 mile of Katahdin's summit, within 1 hour of completing his through hike. The finish line was visible, the achievement certain, the completion imminent. Thomas started the final mile feeling triumphant. This was the moment his entire philosophy centered on: the final step, the ultimate completion, the satisfaction of finishing. He hiked with joy and anticipation, savoring the last stretch of trail before his journey would be complete. But after 20 minutes of hiking what should be a 1-mile section, Thomas realized he wasn't making progress. The summit remained in the distance, no closer than it had been when he started. He checked his GPS. It showed he had traveled half a mile, was only half a mile from the summit now. But visually, the summit looked just as distant as before. Thomas continued hiking, thinking it was just a trick of perspective. But after another 20 minutes, having traveled another half-mile according to his GPS, the summit remained exactly as far away. He was covering distance mathematically, but not making physical progress toward his goal. By the end of the first hour, Thomas had hiked what should be several miles, should have summited multiple times. But the summit remained always in the distance, always visible, always approximately 1 mile away. He was trapped in the final mile, unable to complete it, unable to reach the end point that remained perpetually just ahead. Thomas tried different approaches. He hiked faster. The summit stayed the same distance away. He tried going slower, no difference. He attempted leaving the trail and approaching from a different angle. The summit adjusted its position, remaining exactly 1 mile away regardless of his route. The final mile had become infinite. Thomas could hike forever without completing it, could travel endlessly without reaching the summit, could take infinite steps without achieving the final step. Other hikers passed him going up and down. They completed the final mile in normal time, reached the summit, took their photos, began their descent. Thomas tried to follow them, to use their routes, to shadow their movements. But somehow they would reach the summit while Thomas remained in the final mile, watching them complete the journey he couldn't finish. Days passed. Thomas hiked the final mile continuously, covering hundreds of miles of distance mathematically while remaining in the same 1-mile section physically. He ran out of food, but other hikers shared supplies. He ran out of water, but found streams. He couldn't leave the final mile to resupply because leaving would mean abandoning his completion, failing to finish. Rangers tried to help him to understand what was happening. They could see Thomas hiking, see him making physical progress. But somehow he remained always in the final mile, always approaching but never reaching the summit. They tried to physically guide him to the summit, hiking with him, but he would separate from them inexplicably, remaining in the final mile while they successfully summited. Thomas became a legend among AT hikers, the man trapped in the last mile, forever approaching Katahdin, never finishing. Through hikers would see him during their own final miles, hiking determinedly toward a summit he could never reach, trapped in the space between almost done and actually done. Psychologists suggested it was a mental block, that Thomas was sabotaging his own completion due to fear of finishing, fear of what came after achievement. But Thomas's determination was genuine. He desperately wanted to finish, craved completion with every fiber of his being. The inability to finish wasn't psychological resistance, but physical impossibility. Months passed. Thomas continued hiking the infinite final mile, his body thin from exertion, his face weathered beyond his years, his mind focused obsessively on the summit that remained, forever just ahead. He had hiked thousands of miles in the 1-mile final section, had taken millions of steps without achieving the final step, had approached completion infinitely without ever arriving at it. Years later, Thomas still hikes the final mile. He has become a permanent fixture on Katahdin, a warning to other hikers about the danger of obsessing over completion, about making the final step more important than the journey, about needing closure so desperately that the need itself prevents closure. Some thru-hikers report that Thomas speaks to them during their final mile, warns them not to focus too much on finishing, advises them to stay present in the journey rather than fixating on completion. His warnings usually go unheeded. Hikers in their final mile are focused on finishing, on achieving the completion they've worked months toward. But occasionally a hiker will take Thomas's warning seriously, will consciously let go of the need to finish, will stop obsessing about the final step. These hikers complete the final mile normally, reach the summit, finish their thru hikes. They look back as they celebrate at the summit sign and sometimes see Thomas still down below, still hiking the approach, still in the final mile, trapped by his own philosophy of completion, unable to finish because he needed to finish too much. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy has no record of Thomas Reed completing his thru hike. His name appears on thru-hiker registries up to Maine, with notes indicating he reached the approach to Katahdin but never summited. Officially, he's listed as an incomplete thru-hike attempt, someone who came close but didn't finish. But those who know the story understand that Thomas is still attempting completion, still taking steps toward the final step, still approaching the finish line he'll never cross. He became trapped by his own philosophy, by his obsession with completion, by his need to take the final step. He walks forever in the final mile, the space between almost done and actually done, the gap between approach and arrival, taking infinite steps without achieving the final step, covering infinite distance without reaching the destination, experiencing eternal incompletion as punishment for making completion too important, trapped in the 1 mile he wanted most desperately to finish. Unable to finish because wanting to finish too much created an infinite final mile, a last step that can be approached forever but never taken. A completion that exists always in the future but never in the present, leaving Thomas to hike eternally toward a summit he'll never reach, teaching through his endless incomplete journey that some things are not meant to be finished, that final steps can be infinitely deferred, and that obsessing over completion can trap you forever in the space just before the end, the almost done that never becomes actually done, the approach that never becomes arrival, the final mile that has no end. Story 10. The Believer. Mark Sanderson was a 52-year-old atheist philosopher from Boston who prided himself on his skepticism, his materialism, his absolute rejection of supernatural or spiritual explanations. He believed only in what could be empirically verified, what could be measured and tested. In September 2019, while section hiking through New Hampshire, Mark was confronted with experiences that defied his materialist framework, events that his philosophy couldn't explain, phenomena that shouldn't exist in a purely material universe. What Mark discovered was that disbelief offers no protection, that skepticism is not armor, and that things you don't believe in can still affect you, can still trap you, can still prove through your own tortured experience that the materialist framework is incomplete, and that some realities exist regardless of whether you believe in them. Mark had spent 30 years teaching philosophy, defending materialism against spiritual and supernatural claims. He approached his hike as he approached everything, with skeptical rationality, scientific thinking, empirical observation. When other hikers shared trail legends or supernatural stories, Mark would dismiss them politely, explaining natural explanations for the phenomena. On his 4th day, while hiking through a supposedly haunted section of trail, Mark encountered something that challenged his framework. He saw a figure on the trail ahead, clearly visible, detailed, appearing completely solid and real. But as Mark approached, the figure became translucent, then vanished entirely. Mark's immediate response was to rationalize. His mind was tired. His eyes had been strained by bright sunlight. He had experienced a momentary hallucination. These things happened. were well documented in literature on perception and cognition. The experience didn't challenge materialism. It confirmed that the brain sometimes generated false perceptions. But the phenomenon repeated. Mark saw figures multiple times over the next 2 days. Hikers who would appear solid, then fade. People who would walk ahead of him, then simply cease to exist. Each time, Mark rationalized, finding natural explanations, maintaining his skeptical framework. Then the physical phenomena began. Objects in Mark's pack would move on their own. He would pack his tent in one pocket and find it in another pocket hours later. His water bottle would refill itself impossibly. His food supplies would last far longer than the quantities he carried. Mark's rationality became strained. These weren't perceptual errors. These were physical events, measurable changes in his environment. He tried to explain them through natural means. He was misremembering where he packed things. He was refilling his water and forgetting. His food estimates were incorrect. But the explanations felt increasingly forced, increasingly inadequate to account for what he was experiencing. By day 7, Mark was experiencing phenomena he couldn't rationalize. He watched his compass spin continuously, unable to settle on north. He saw his shadow moving independently, walking beside him but not matching his movements. He heard voices that seemed to come from specific physical locations but found nothing when he investigated. Mark's philosophical framework was collapsing. He had built his identity on skepticism, on materialism, on the belief that everything had natural explanations. But he was experiencing things his framework couldn't accommodate, phenomena that resisted natural explanation no matter how hard he tried to force them into materialist boxes. The psychological strain was severe. Mark's entire worldview was being challenged by his direct experience. He felt his identity dissolving, his philosophical certainty crumbling. If materialism was incomplete, if supernatural phenomena were real, then who was he? What did his 30 years of teaching mean if his fundamental framework was wrong? Mark tried to leave the trail, to escape the experiences that were destroying his belief system. But the phenomena followed him. Even after exiting the trail, even back in civilization, Mark continued experiencing impossible events, objects moving on their own, figures appearing and vanishing, physical laws being violated in ways he couldn't rationalize. The thing Mark had refused to believe in, supernatural or non-material reality, was forcing itself on him through undeniable direct experience. And the psychological cost of maintaining his skepticism in the face of contradictory evidence was destroying him. Mark had 2 choices: maintain his materialist framework and accept that he was experiencing persistent hallucinations or mental illness, or abandon his framework and accept that his experiences were real. That reality included non-material components his philosophy had rejected. Neither choice was tolerable. Accepting mental illness meant losing trust in his own perceptions, losing the foundation of empirical observation his philosophy was built on. But accepting non-material reality meant abandoning the worldview he had spent his life defending, admitting he had been wrong about fundamental questions. Mark attempted a third option, trying to remain uncertain, to hold both possibilities open, to exist in agnostic suspension about whether his experiences were real or hallucinatory. But this proved psychologically impossible. The human mind craves certainty, craves a stable framework for understanding experience. Perpetual uncertainty, permanent inability to decide what was real, was its own form of torture. 6 months after leaving the trail, Mark had a mental breakdown. The strain of experiencing phenomena that violated his beliefs while maintaining those beliefs had fractured something fundamental in his psychology. He was hospitalized, diagnosed with psychotic disorder, treated with antipsychotics. But the medications didn't stop the experiences. Mark continued seeing and experiencing impossible things, continued encountering phenomena that shouldn't exist in a material universe. The difference was that now, medicated and diagnosed, he was told these experiences were symptoms of illness rather than perceptions of reality. Mark's colleagues from his philosophy department visited him in the psychiatric facility, expressing sadness at his breakdown. They saw it as tragic that a brilliant skeptical mind had succumbed to delusion. But Mark knew differently. He hadn't succumbed to delusion. He had encountered reality that his philosophy couldn't accommodate, and the encounter had broken him. He tried to explain this to his visitors, tried to convey that the supernatural phenomena were real, that materialism was incomplete, that there were aspects of reality his framework couldn't capture. But these explanations only confirmed his diagnosis in his colleagues' minds, proved that he was lost to psychosis, that his skeptical rationality had been destroyed by mental illness. Mark stopped trying to convince anyone. He accepted his diagnosis, took his medications, participated in treatment. But privately, he knew that what he had experienced on the trail was real, that his skepticism had offered no protection against supernatural phenomena, that disbelief had not prevented non-material realities from affecting him. He lives now in a halfway house, on permanent disability, his philosophical career over. He is the cautionary tale his colleagues use when warning students about the importance of maintaining skeptical discipline, about not letting isolated, unusual experiences undermine rational frameworks. They cite him as an example of what happens when even strong skeptical minds succumb to supernatural thinking. But Mark knows he didn't succumb to supernatural thinking. Supernatural reality imposed itself on him regardless of his beliefs, proved through relentless experience that materialism was incomplete, and destroyed his life in the process because he couldn't integrate his experiences with his framework. Couldn't believe what he was experiencing. Couldn't abandon the philosophy he had built his identity on. He exists now in a liminal state, experiencing supernatural phenomena daily while being told these experiences are symptoms of mental illness, knowing that what he perceives is real while being unable to prove it to anyone, trapped between the reality he experiences and the reality his culture acknowledges, unable to reconcile them, unable to convince others, unable to trust his own perceptions because they contradict everything he spent his life believing. Mark sometimes wishes he had never gone on that hike, had never encountered phenomena that challenged his materialism. But he also knows that the phenomena existed whether he encountered them or not, that supernatural or non-material reality was always there, always operating, always present in the world, and that his skepticism had been protecting him not from supernatural reality but from awareness of it, keeping him comfortable in a limited framework that couldn't accommodate what exists beyond the material. Now he knows more, understands that reality is stranger and larger than his philosophy allowed. But knowledge came at the cost of everything: his career, his reputation, his mental health, his ability to function in a society built on shared, materialist assumptions. He was destroyed not by supernatural forces but by the cognitive dissonance of experiencing reality his belief system claimed didn't exist, by the irreconcilable conflict between his philosophy and his perceptions, by the simple fact that things you don't believe in can still affect you, can still trap you, can still prove themselves real through your own unwilling testimony, leaving you broken and disbelieved, unable to return to comfortable skepticism but unable to convince anyone that the things you now know are real, trapped forever between two frameworks: the materialism you were trained in and the supernatural reality you experienced, believing both and neither, destroyed by the discovery that skepticism offers no protection, that disbelief is not armor, and that the trail will teach you what's real regardless of whether you believe it, whether you want to learn it, whether you can survive the lesson.